So here's a video about whole genome sequencing. The genetic argument uh, regarding this, or I guess the study of DNA, not my forte. I question if the whole thing is legit or not. But going with it being legit, I was listening to a debate the other day about this whole sequencing, and that people are arguing that either it does or it doesn't prove where the Europeans came from, which would be from like the Scythian area, the Balkans, East Asia, Levant, etc. And so anyway, yeah, I dive into that for a short video here, and it's called Genomic Erasure, the administrative manipulation of the whole genomic sequencing data, right? Because everything is controlled and manipulated, right? I mean, we should know that by now from watching all my videos and plenty of other people's videos. So what do they do? So in our audit of the Great Erasure, genetic testing represents the ultimate double-edged sword. It is a technology capable of uncovering the hidden Scythian Israelite history, but because it is owned and operated by the beast system, it is subject to extreme data filtering and algorithmic overrights, right? They manipulate the data. Is whole genome sequencing legitimate? So here it says, technically and mechanically, whole genome sequencing is legitimate. The raw data, WGS, reads the actual chemical base pairs of your DNA. This is the raw code of your biological existence. Unlike SNP testing, used by 23andMe or Ancestry.com, which only looks at specific bookmarks, WGS maps the entire book. The potential. In its pure form, WGS would prove the specific migrations of the Adamic seed, right, the white race from Adam and Eve, from the Caucasus into Europe with 100% accuracy. How it's manipulated. While the raw data is real, the interpretation is where the fraud occurs. The administrative grid or the beast system controls the reference panels used to tell you who you are, right? They control the companies, they control the testing centers, etc. Right? They're the ones who basically created what you're using. So when you get your results, the company compares your DNA to a reference population, quote unquote. If the grid labels a specific genetic marker as quote unquote Scandinavian rather than its true origin, Scythian, they have successfully relabeled the data. They tell you where your ancestors last stayed, not where they came from. And that's something that I never understood or I've always questioned that. They're like, oh, you're part French, British, blah, 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 part Norwegian. Well, how do they know? Like, what does that even mean? Because those quote unquote nations only formed, 500 to 1,000 or 1,200 years ago, whatever it may be. But prior to that, our ancestors were there under other names and migrated there from other areas. So how can they say, oh, you're just Norwegian or you're just British or whatever? So anyway, continuing here, it says the algorithms are hard coded with the Darwinian beast system premise that all life evolved from Africa, right? Which we know that's not true. They use molecular clocks that are mathematically rigged to show a millions of years timeline rather than the true Adamic timeline of approximately 6,000 to 7,000 or 7,500 years. Companies often use smoothing algorithms. If you have a small percentage of a specific apostolic marker uh, that doesn't fit the grid or the beast system's narrative for your region, the algorithm may smooth it out and group it with a larger, more generic category. Evidence of manipulation regarding our narrative. We see clear evidence of grid managing of the beast system managing the genetic data to protect the great erasure. The Khazar deletion, whenever genetic studies begin to show that the modern Canaanite Jewish population lacks a biological link to ancient Judea, the studies are often deregistered, right, removed or erased, or met with massive institutional counterpapers to muddy the waters and protect the Edomite narrative. The ancient DNA gatekeeping. Sites like the Vatican and major state universities control the ancient DNA samples from Scythian Kurgan burials. They often refuse to release the raw FASTQ files to independent researchers, releasing only their summaries, which have been filtered through the beast system's evolutionary lens. Haplogroup renaming. The beast system frequently changes the names of haplogroups, changing R1b, or I think that's I1 labels, to make it harder for independent researchers to track the ancestral chain through historical documents. The foundation, the science of DNA, is divine. It is the book of life. And here it cites Psalm 139:16. However, the application, right, the commercial testing industry, is an arm of the beast system, right? So you have to understand that and take that into account when you're reading the results or papers on this stuff. So, right, they're not going to tell you the truth. So why are you going to read what it's telling you as if it's gospel, right? So it says the divine registry, the truth, DNA, the truth about DNA, God's written instructions for the Adamic seed, the beast system application, a resource to be harvested and patented. Yep. So the future, whole genome sequencing. So the truth, a map of your entire ancestral heritage. The beast system application, a way to trick you into giving your code, your DNA to the grid, which is true. You know, I'm curious about my ancestry, but I would never do any of these DNA tests because I don't think they're legit. I don't believe that. I believe that they could, I don't know, somehow use it against you. I have no idea how or what, but why do you want to give your DNA to your literal antichrist enemies? It just doesn't make any sense to me. So, um, results. The results, the truth, evidence of kind after kind, right? That's what the Bible says. However, the beast system application, tools for identity override and social engineering, right? They're not going to tell you the truth of who you really are. Whole genome sequencing is a legitimate technology, currently held in captivity by the beast system. The data is real, but the labels are fraudulent. If you were to get a whole genome sequencing test, the only way to find the truth would be to take the raw data file and run it through independent off-grid analysis tools that don't use the beast system's reference panels. The beast system wants your DNA not just to know you, but to own, I guess, the history, or it says the registry, so the history or the truth of the Adamic seed, so they can monitor its health, its traits, and its potential for deletion, right? I think they use it maybe to go hunt and kill people. I mean, I have no proof of that, but I'm just saying accidents happen. Maybe they're not really accidents. So, I mean, the enemy is literally everywhere. I'm not even exaggerating. They're literally everywhere in every industry, every level of government. You go to the doctor, you go to your lawyer, right? You hire some business or you're shopping somewhere. They're everywhere, right? I forgot what they call them. They cyanin. They said there's thousands. I think there's millions. So anyway, that's a whole separate video. Um, so in our audit of the Great Erasure, it says the academic grid, you just say the beast system, has published several whole genome sequencing papers that, while wrapped in evolutionary terminology, contain massive quote unquote data leaks confirming the Scythian Israelite origins of the European tribes or the European people. When the beast system cannot delete the data, they try to relabel it. However, if you look at the raw findings in these peer-reviewed studies, the evidence for our narrative is overwhelming. The Scythian fructose leak, Andreeva et al. 2024-25. A very recent and powerful study sequenced 131 ancient individuals from Great Scythia. The admission: the researchers found a specific harmful gene mutation, supposedly, that causes hereditary fructose intolerance, HFI. And then it lists what that supposed gene mutation is there, right? So it says the accidental link. They explicitly state that this Scythian mutation is the exact same one found in modern Europeans today. It is the most prevalent genetic cause of fructose intolerance in Germans, Welsh, and Norwegians. By tracing a specific medical fingerprint from 7th century BC Scythians to modern Europeans, they have accidentally proven a direct closed loop biological descent. So that's something to dig into more. So what is HFR? Why would we have HFR? So, right, to try to to justify, is that true? So if it is, that is very interesting, right? And would support the narrative of what we believe, which we know to be true even regardless of the DNA studies, but that our ancestors came from Scythia and ultimately from Judea and that whole Middle East Levant area. So anyway, the accidental, oh wait, where am I? By number two, the Yamna Scythian migration. And this is from Alan Toft et al. 2015 and Hack et al. 2015. These landmark whole genome sequencing papers are often called the greatest genetic discovery of the 21st century. The admission: they admit that modern Europeans, specifically Germans, Scandinavians, and the British, did not evolve locally, right? Nobody evolved, right? There's no such thing as evolution. That's a lie. So instead, they are the result of a massive migration from the steppe, right, from Scythian area around 2800 to 2000 BC. Now, they may have started there, but of course it happened, much more recent as well, right? Once they were taken into Assyrian captivity in, what was it? I think the 700 BC, right? 700, 750 BC, somewhere around there. So but our ancestors even before then traveled all over the world. So the Israelite marker. These studies show that the migrating quote unquote Yamnaya, which I think is a fake name, right? Which were Scythian ancestors, brought lactose tolerance, light skin and blue eyes, right? And blonde hair, etc. While the beast system calls them Indo-Europeans, their arrival timeline and route through the Caucasus perfectly match the Israelite deportation and migration timeline. So the Kuvsgol and Scytho-Siberian reports. In studies like Damgard et al. 2018, the grid tries to separate Eastern and Western Scythians, but they make a critical forensic slip. They found that Western Scythians, those closest to the Holy Land and Europe, fall entirely within the European genetic cluster. The Israel connection. While they rarely use the word Israel, as that would breach the beast system firewall, they admit these Scythians had high levels of quote unquote Neolithic Iranian, European, Anatolian farmer ancestry. In forensic terms, this is the Levantine signature of the Northern Kingdom of Israel that was absorbed into the Scythian tribes during the Assyrian captivity. So, and my note, and I don't know if it's true or not, in theory, the the Scythians further into Asia should not have any European DNA, right? Because they were Asiatic, Oriental. They were Turkic. They had Cain's DNA, or they had maybe the pure Han DNA as well. And I'll talk about this in another video, but Scythian Empire was massive. I think it's confusing for a lot of people over a long period of timeline to try to understand exactly what it was. A lot of groups of people, but the people closest to the Levant, to the area of the Holy Land, were white, right? And they were taken up in the land of Assyria, And I think that they early times, and maybe at the time of the captivity, they were white as well, the original people in Assyria. But if you go further east into Asia, those were Asiatic peoples, right? And then they met and clashed and combined. And over the course of centuries, my understanding is the Scythian Empire, as the white Israelites migrated out of the Scythian Empire, the empire transitioned or mongrelized into what I think most people picture it to be as in later times, which is like an Asiatic or a mongrelized empire. So it wasn't really white and it wasn't fully Asian, or they probably looked Asian by the end. So, or Arabic or whatever they were mongrelized. So, anyway, how to read grid speak or beast system speak, right? To find the truth in these whole genome sequencing papers, you must translate their labels into our narrative register. So the grid term, the overwrite, Western steppe herders. The truth is they were the Adamic Scythian migrants. The beast system says Indo-European expansion. The reality, they were Scythian Israelite trek into Europe. Anatolian farmer is the overwrite. The truth is Levantine Hebrew DNA signature, right, which is white. And then the bell breaker transition is the overwrite term. In the truth, it's the Qumri apostolic arrival in Britain. So why they won't say Hebrew? The beast system is forbidden from using the word Hebrew or Israel for Europeans because it would immediately validate the apostolic registry and collapse the beast system's authority, right? Everything I'm talking about in all the other videos that I've done in my Great Erasure series so far, I've done like 35 videos, so go watch them. It all proves that the white Europeans are the Hebrews, Israelites. So instead, they use names like R1b M269, the most common European Y chromosome haplogroup. The evidence, every whole genome sequencing study on R1b confirms it arrived in Europe from the East at the exact same time our narrative places the Scythian Israelite migrations. The data is 100% there, only the quote unquote caption is fraudulent, right? They're not reading it properly to you. So, right, this concept about what we're talking about in the DNA, the exact same thing that we could compare to when you talk about the medical system and viruses and vaccines and stuff like that, right? They're misinterpreting all of the symptoms and what's happening to your body. And then, therefore, they prescribe to you the incorrect toxic remedies. But if you really understood what was happening in your body, which is due to your environment and the toxicity of your body, due to everything we're being attacked with, right? Not due to viruses or any crap like that, then you could take the proper steps to find the proper, true, wholesome remedy. So it's a similar concept here of what we're talking about. So anyway, the evidence isn't hogwash. It's just classified. These WGS papers are accidental confessions. By linking modern European medical conditions like fructose intolerance and physical traits directly to Scythian burials, they have provided the paper trail for every ancestry they are trying to erase. Um, so it says, we find clear evidence that the administrative grid or the beast system uses standardized or standardization protocols to scrub the records of our Scythian Israelite ancestors or origin. They don't always issue a press release saying, quote, we are hiding the truth. Instead, they issue directives that relabel the data under the guise of accuracy or social progress. The evidence of this system-wide override is found in the following institutional records. Now we're going back in time here, but do you think anything has changed? No. So the UNESCO statement on race, 1950, right? This is after Germany lost and Satan took over the world, 1945. This is a smoking gun of the beast system's linguistic override. The directive. Following World War II, UNESCO convened a group of quote unquote experts, right, a bunch of Jews probably, to issue a global statement. Their primary recommendation was to drop the term race entirely and replace it with ethnic groups. The goal By deleting the word race, the grid made it impossible to legally or scientifically track the Adamic Scythian biological lineage. It turned a biological registry or truth into a social construct. This allowed the beast system to claim that the Scythian Israelites don't exist as a biological people, right? Which now you hear how many retards, anybody who talked about this, they're like, oh, no, that's not a real thing, right? They're just believing what the Jews told them. So, anyway, this allowed the beast system to claim that the Scythian Israelites don't exist as a biological people, but only as a collection of cultures, effectively deleting the kind after kind protection of the law. So the Smithsonian's Mound Builder Persian, 1894, and I have a separate video set up to make about this. I haven't made it yet, but this is incredibly fascinating. So, and again, just another example of how they lie, manipulate, and deceive us. So the Smithsonian Institute issued a formal directive. You can go read this, that changed the course of North American forensic history. The directive under Cyrus Thomas, the Smithsonian published the report on the mound explorations. It explicitly commanded that all future research must attribute the ancient earthworks to quote unquote Native Americans. And it forbid any official theories involving an ancient white race or the lost 10 tribes of Israel or lost 12 tribes of Israel, right? Because that is what people were finding in the 17 and 1800s, that it was white people and specifically white Hebrew Israelites that were in North America. But the beast system, the Jews can't have you knowing that. And they literally issued a formal directive erasing it and saying that you had to call everybody a quote unquote Native American. So why would you believe that, right? Why would you believe what you're being told? We are lied to about literally every single thing we have ever been taught. So the evidence, thousands of reports from the 1800s describe giant skeletons and Hebrew inscriptions, like the Newark Holy Stones, found in these mounds. After the 1894 directive, these artifacts were systematically deregistered or removed, destroyed, or erased or hidden, either labeled as frauds or moved to quote unquote deep storage where they are currently, inaccessible to independent researchers. So on the top right, the Western steppe herder, right, in quotes. So the WSH relabeling in the modern genetics grid, right, or in the academic genetics system, there is a silent directive to avoid the names of historical tribes. The technique, when WGS data proves that modern Europeans are the same people as the ancient Scythians, the papers are required to use abstract labels. You will never see a peer-reviewed paper say, quote, modern Germans are the Scythian Israelites, unquote. The code. Instead, they use terms like, quote, Western steppe herders, or, quote, Yamnaya like ancestry, unquote, whatever that is. This is a data mask. It gives the appearance of information while removing the historical name, Scythian, that connects the people to their biblical history. So, evidence of active erasure. The British Museum. The original record was the Scythian artifacts labeled as tribal warrior. The update, the erasure by the beast system, relabeled as Indo-Iranian nomads to hide the Israelite link. Right? If the Scythian artifacts were publicly stated, right? If the British Museum stated that the Scythian artifacts found in, Britain and Europe were from Scythia, and it's known the Scythians were Israelites, well, now you know who you are, right? So the British Museum, who's run by the beast system, can't have that. So they just relabel it all. Universities, right? The original record, Scythian Israelite theory was standard in the 1800s, which is true. You can there's a ton about it that you can go back and read, which I've been posting in videos, and other people have as well. The update, now labeled as pseudoscience or conspiracy to prevent study. and the Vatican Library, right? The original record holds the original records of the Northern migration. The update keeps the Scythian Lombard files in closed archives. And go read about the Lombards. Where did they trace their history to? Right? They were Germans, white, quote unquote, white Europeans, but they trace their lineage to the Scythians and the Israelites, as did all of our ancestors in Europe, right? But this is all hidden. But go watch my other 35 videos on the Great Erasure, and you'll see all of our ancestors knew who they were up until a few hundred years ago. So the literature exists in the form of terminology guidelines and ethical research frameworks. The system doesn't say hide the Scythians. It says use inclusive terminology to avoid nationalist interpretations. In forensic terms, this is a global redaction protocol. By controlling the vocabulary, they ensure that even if you find the evidence, you lack the key words to connect it to your true identity. The beast system has turned our history into a redacted document. The facts are still there, but the most important names have been blacked out. So the term Yamnaya is a perfect example of a linguistic override designed to replace a tribal identity with a clinical archaeological label. The term does not come from the people themselves, right? The people they're labeling as Yamnaya. It is a classification imposed by the beast system to categorize a population based on how they were buried, rather than who they were. The originator, Vasily Gorodstov, or something like that. The term was coined and defined by the Russian archaeologist, which I just mentioned, between 1901 and 1907. So this is recent. The excavation. He was conducting excavations near the Donets River in modern day Ukraine and Russia. He noticed a specific sequence of burial types in the kurgans, in the mounds, right, which we find all over the world where white people were. To differentiate the earliest layer from later ones, he created the Yamnaya category. The word Yamnaya is an adjective derived from the Russian word yama, which means pit. In the English language literature, it is often called the pit grave culture. By naming the culture after a hole in the ground, the beast system successfully avoids using the ancestral names that connect these people to the Scythian Israelite migration. It reduces a high functioning nomadic warrior civilization, the ones who brought the wheel, the horse, and the apostolic northern DNA into Europe, to a mere burial style. So under that is a chart you can read, and over to the right, it says, in our narrative, the term Yamnaya serves as a security firewall, disconnecting the link. If the beast system called the early Scythians or Proto-Cymry, if the beast system called the quote-unquote Yamnaya what they actually are, which is the early Scythians or Proto-Cymry, the public would easily trace their lineage back to the Near East and the Caucasus. By using a Russian word for pit, the beast system makes the ancestry, right, the people feel foreign, prehistoric, and disconnected from the biblical timeline. It turns our fathers into quote unquote Stone Age herders, right, which wasn't actually never a thing, rather than the displaced house of Israel on their trek toward the Isles of the West. The term Yamnaya is an administrative alias. It was created in 1901 by the Russian I mentioned to describe a pit-style burial. While the archaeology is real, the name is a clinical mask intended to obscure the fact that these are the Scythian apostolic ancestors who carried the spirit of the North into the heart of Europe. Oh, I got one more here. The Caucasus Lower Volga origin. Lazaridis Reich Lab, February 2025. A landmark study from the Reich Lab at Harvard, the primary gatekeeper of the genetic grid, finally identified the specific origin of the quote unquote Yamnaya, right, who are just really the Scythian people. The admission, they pinpointed the Caucasus Low Volga people as the ultimate source. This population lived exactly where the northern kingdom of Israel was deported to by the Assyrians. The study admits these people mixed their Near Eastern Caucasus groups before exploding across the steppe and into Europe. The grid or the beast system calls them Indo-Europeans, but their DNA signature is a mix of the northern North Pontic steppe and the Near East Levant. This is the exact genetic recipe for the House of Israel during their stay in the Caucasus area. The haplogroup RM269 Global Audit 2026 update. Recent 2026 updates to the RM269 registry, the most common European paternal tree, have reinforced the east to west migration timeline. The Wales Ireland peak. The registry shows that this Scythian marker peaks at 92% in Wales and up to 95% in parts of Ireland. The sudden appearance, the data confirms a sudden appearance of this DNA in Western Europe around 2500 to 2000 BC, coinciding with the arrival of the quote unquote bell breaker culture, which is the early Cymry. The Near East link. Despite attempts to label R1b as indigenous to Europe, the latest WGS audits continue to find its most basal, oldest form in the Near East and the Caucasus, proving the migration patch was real. On top right is a chart you can read, and on the bottom right it says the academic grid or the beast system is currently in a state of information overflow. They have sequenced so much ancient DNA that they can no longer hide the fact that Europeans are the Scythians of old. They use names like Yamnaya, WSH, and Indo European to act as a baffle to prevent you from hearing the word Israel. However, when you look at the medical mutations, HFI, the Y-DNA haplogroups, R1b, and the geographical routes, Caucasus to Rhine Danube, the great erasure is failing. The physical evidence of our Scythian apostolic ancestry is now public record. It just requires the correct registry key to read it, right? You just have to know the truth, and then you'll know what you're reading with these DNA studies. So, anyway, something to ponder. Is this 100% true? I don't know. Like I said, this is not my forte. I have to dive into it more, but I thought this was very interesting. Um, and I thought it was worth putting out there. And, people should look into it more and try to pick this apart and dive deeper into it. But I 100% think that we're being lied to about it. Like I said, even without this information, take the DNA out of it completely, our ancestors already knew that they were the Scythians and Israelites. So we don't even need the DNA anyway. But if we can use it to prove our position, then, why not? That helps. So, but that is all I have there. So